If you aren't getting invited to interviews, it could be that you aren't selling your skills strong enough in your resume. Today, I want to talk about the 5 ways that you can package your skills for a persuasive personal brand. Grab your cup of tea and let's dive into it. The skills element of your career brand strategy is what is going to build credibility and confidence with a potential recruiter. So you need to make sure that throughout all the sections of your resume, you are getting this right. So let's start with one of the places where it is most important, and that is to sell your skills in the first sentence. Remember that humans have a primacy and a recency bias, meaning that we pay attention most, or we remember most, what we hear first and what we hear last. The value proposition of your resume is the first section of your resume that a hiring manager is going to see. And the first sentence of that value proposition becomes even more important. It forms the hook of your resume. And you want to make sure that in that first sentence itself, it is strongly communicating as much as possible what is most relevant to the role. Some of the things that you might like to focus on in that first sentence, for example, is the number of years that you bring to that particular role, the relevant number of years that you have in that field of expertise. You also want to highlight the skills that are most important to that role. So as an example, this might be how you could do this in the first sentence of your resume. I'm a project manager and operations specialist with 7+ years of experience in construction, mining, and civil sectors. So with that, for example, you are identifying that the core skills and capabilities you bring to the role is that you are a project manager and an operations specialist. You're highlighting the years of experience, and then you're also highlighting the industries that you have worked in, if you can squeeze this in as well. So with this format, you are setting your skills and the relevant value that you bring to a role up for success from the very first sentence. Tip number 2 is to package your skills in your page 1 pitch. Now, if the value proposition of your resume, the opening paragraph of your resume is, say, the elevator pitch of your resume, then page 1 of your resume is more like the 1-page pitch of your resume. So I almost see this as an executive summary of your resume, and the skills profile within that almost becomes like this mini executive summary. So there are a couple ways that you can treat a skills profile. You can either dot point it, but you want to make sure that you're dot pointing this very strategically. For example, if you are in a really highly technical role, dot point formats might work better so that you can, for example, highlight the really technical aspects or processes or platforms, whatever it is that might be most relevant to that role. But what I normally prefer to do as a priority before switching to potentially the dot point method is to have a categorized skills profile. So this is where instead of having dot points listed, you are picking maybe 3 to 5 key categories that you can sell the particular skills and experience that you have had within that category. And you're picking those that are most relevant to the target role that you are either applying for or that you want to have in your industry in general. What are the 3 to 5 things that is most important for success in those roles? And then you're using the sentences that you add to those categories to really sell the rest of what is in your resume, or to aggregate the skills and capabilities that you have as strongly as possible. For example, if one of the most important skills in the role that you are targeting is stakeholder engagement, one of your categories might be stakeholder engagement then, with a description something like skilled collaborator, building relationships with internal and external stakeholders, including up to 2,000 customers, 20 industry partners, 3 local councils, and state government departments, such as the Department of Education. So with that, you are being specific about numbers throughout that. And this is, again, an opportunity to aggregate your experience. So it might not necessarily just be the current role that you're in, but for example, the largest customer base you have worked across, or the number of local councils, as I've said, you've worked with, or the departments that you're familiar with. And to give you another example, in financial management, for example, you might say highly proficient in managing budgets ranging from $500,000 to $1.5 million, leading annual budget negotiations, identifying significant cost savings of up to $200,000 annually, and delivering regular monthly reporting for senior executives and board members. So you're using all of those words really strategically. You're tying into the skills that you have noticed that the job is asking for, and you're showing the range and the diversity of your capabilities. With the cost saving, for example, you're showing the impact that you have been able to have in a role. So you're saying a lot in just a few lines. Another example for, say, written and verbal communication might be that you are a confident communicator, leading email marketing and writing weekly newsletters delivered to 5,000 customers. Skilled presenter, regularly presenting at monthly senior management forums, experienced industry guest speaker for associations and universities. Again, you're using every word to be specific about the capabilities that are going to impress the recruiter on the other side of your resume. And another way that you can make this even more convincing is, instead of saying, for example, associations and universities, you could make this even more specific to what those organizations are. So again, when people see the names that they are familiar with, this gives them something for the eyes to land on, and it helps to build trust by association. Now, these categories don't necessarily need to be so streamlined to one particular capability. You might also have categories within those categories. So you're grouping relevant skills together. So this is where you can take all of those dot points that you have tried to communicate in your skills profile and start to develop themes around them. For example, instead of just saying policies, you might say something like policies, procedures, and compliance. Instead of just saying risk management, you might have your category be occupational health and safety, risk management, and incident investigation. Instead of just saying data analysis, you might have a category that is data analysis and reporting. Instead of just saying stakeholder engagement, this might be where you also add team leadership to this as well. So you want to make sure that when you are coming up with these categories, that you are doing this strategically and that it is going to have the most impact for your resume. And I should also say that with this section of your resume, the skills profile of your resume and the value proposition of your resume, I find it most useful to fully write this at the end of the resume writing process, because then you are empowered with all of that information and the skills and the outcomes that you have considered when you have gone through all of the rest of your professional experience. And you can see how you can more easily aggregate that information, or the points that you want to pull out for page one that are going to stand out, or the things that aren't necessarily repeated in other areas of your page one or the rest of your resume either. This could be a place where you're again connecting the dots and doing that heavy mental lifting for the reader to showcase why even on page one they should already be convinced that you're the right person for the role. But what I do find useful is at least starting to draft what those key categories could be as a part of that process as well. So you understand the strategy and direction that your career brand is trying to convey in the rest of your resume as well. Tip number 3 is to mirror the language of the job description and job ad. In my earlier episode on the 10 tiny ways that your resume could be working against you, I talked about the importance of mirroring the language that your target organization uses. So particularly in the value proposition and the the key expertise section of your resume on page 1, you want to make sure that you are tying into the language that that organization uses. So if you more naturally use maybe different terms for processes that you have or platforms that you use, you want to make sure that you are using the terms that they use in that organization so that you are making it as obvious as possible to the reader that you tick those boxes. And as I talked about in my earlier episode, you have to also remember that the person on the other side of your resume, particularly in those earlier stages of the process, might not necessarily be a technical expert in the field that you are applying for. So making it really obvious how you align to the resume is going to show that you match what they are comparing your application to. So you're, for example, able to convey to, say, a people and culture or HR professional why you have the skills that they are looking for on behalf of another department. Tip number 4 is to put your skills in headlights. And by this, I mean make sure that your most important skills, or how you are packaging your profile appears directly under your name as well on your resume. So this forms a part of your heading. It's one of your subheadings in the top of your resume. And if you think about all of the hard work that you have put into selling your resume in the professional experience section of your resume and into your skills profile and your value proposition, this is like putting the ribbon on that package. It is the first thing that they are going to see right after they see your name. So this is that first layer of your career brand wrapping before they start to discover all of the other value that you have to bring to the role. And there are different ways that you might like to do this. For example, you might say that you are a marketing and communications manager, or you might title what is most relevant to your career history and your career experience, as opposed to just being the title of your current role. Another way that you could also do this is to have more of a key-worded subtitle to your name. So that might be something like commercial manager, project manager, operations, or you might also have any formal qualification added to that, like MBA, for example. So you're just highlighting from the very get-go things of value, but in a key-worded format as opposed to more of that profile header. And tip number 5 is to speak your achievements through your skills. You want to make sure that in the professional experience section of your resume, you aren't just regurgitating what a job description sounds like, that you are building an achievement-orientated resume that shows the unique impact that you have had in a role. It's unique to you and your experience, so it doesn't sound like anyone else could have done those things. What you also don't want to do is simply show the results and all of the relevant numbers without actually highlighting the role that you had in that. This is where, for example, the STAR method can be really useful in reminding us of the actions that we took to achieve those results. So the STAR method is situation, task, action, and results. And I like to use this in various different sequences for dot points just to make sure that the most important information is either at the start or the end of a sentence, so it's not always in that sequence. And another method could also be the CAR method, which is challenge, action, and result. But regardless of which method you use, or if you fully follow the structure of any of those formulas, what is most important in that is to not lose sight of the action, because the action is what is most relevant to the skills that you are bringing to a role. And you want to make sure that you are doing that mental heavy lifting for your reader. So while it might be really obvious to you that a particular result is because of certain actions, and for you that just feels like your normal day to day, Those actions could actually be things that are really selling the skill set that you bring to an organization. Maybe it was the stakeholder engagement that you had with really specialist groups. Maybe it was the strategy that you defined to be able to achieve those results. What was the actions that you took to achieve the outcomes that you are highlighting throughout your resume? Because how you sell your skills throughout your resume is what is going to transform your resume from easily overlooked to outstanding to recruiters. Thanks so much. For more on personal branding, subscribe for more like this, and I'll see you in the next episode.